out of the way? Okay. All right.
Everybody feel good about it? Yep. All right, go ahead, sir.
Okay. I am Deputy Chief Michael Wally of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. I'm going to give you some preliminary information as we know it right now. Obviously, this information is subject to change as we get further in the investigation, and we will be sure to update you guys with any new information that we can release. On Friday, November 10th, 2023, at approximately 11 a.m., IMPD North District officers were dispatched to the 3900 block of Caroline Avenue on a report of an armed adult male actively firing shots. The initial caller reported that the male was displaying erratic behavior. When officers arrived on scene, they parked their patrol vehicles in the street to create space between the suspect and them. Officers positioned themselves behind their vehicles in an attempt to de-escalate the incident by giving the suspect verbal commands to drop the firearm. While remaining behind their vehicles, officers coordinated efforts to form an arrest team and take the suspect into custody. Once officers encountered the suspect, they continued giving verbal commands to lie flat on the ground and do not move. Initially, the suspect complied with officers' commands and laid down with his weapon next to him. Based on the initial investigations, detectives believe the suspect left the firearm in the original spot where he laid it down. After the suspect was on the ground, officers requested the suspect to stand up and walk towards them while remaining behind their patrol cars. As officers continued to give verbal commands, the suspect stopped, turned away from the officers, and began rapidly moving in the direction where the firearm was located. Officers continued to give verbal commands by saying, "Don't do that." However, the suspect continued to move towards the gun on the ground. At some point, an officer fired his service weapon. The suspect suffered an injury that detectives believe is consistent with a gunshot wound. The alleged suspect was taken into custody, and officers rendered medical aid and applied a tourniquet at the scene. Indianapolis Emergency Medical Services, IMS, arrived and transported the suspect to an area hospital in serious but stable condition. The suspect has been preliminarily charged with resisting law enforcement, which is a felony level 6, unlawful possession of a firearm, which is felony level 6, and criminal recklessness, felony level 5. No officers were injured during this incident. Following the shooting, officers completed a check of the immediate area and no citizens were found injured. Detectives are confident that there is no ongoing threat to the community. The Marion County Prosecutor's Office responded to the scene to assist with the investigation. The officers involved were equipped with body-worn cameras during this incident. The Indianapolis-Marion County Forensics Agency responded to identify and collect potential forensic evidence. The IMPD Critical Incident Response Team responded to the scene to conduct the criminal investigation. IMPD Internal Affairs is conducting a separate administrative investigation. The officers who fired their firearm have been placed on administrative leave, as is standard procedure in an officer-involved shooting investigation. The Civilian Majority Use of Force Board will conduct a mandatory hearing and any attempt of use of deadly force against a person. This occurs after the conclusion of the criminal process. The Police Officer Support Team, POST Team, responded to provide peer support for our officers. The IMPD Chaplain's Office and Victims Assistant Unit responded to assist those involved. Anyone with information is asked to call Detective Christopher Craighill at the Homicide Office by calling 317-327-3475. Anyone with information can also call Crime Stoppers anonymously at 317-262-TIPS.
Can you clarify how many officers discharged their weapon?
1.
And how many were put on administrative leave?
Just 1 has been put on administrative leave.
Are you able to talk about the suspect's mental state at all?
We did get information from the family after the fact that there was possible some mental health issues involved at some point in his life.
Who made the original phone call to police? Was it family members?
It was an anonymous caller believed to be a neighbor.
Was the suspect firing shots at anyone or just firing shots randomly in the air, or do you know?
Evidence on scene indicates that he was firing from inside of the house out. That's all we have right now.
Were any other homes hit? Any other property hit?
Evidence indicates that there were a car struck and then a home struck on the opposite side of the street.
Did the suspect have the gun in his hand when officers fired?
I don't have that information.
Did the suspect fire any shots while officers were here at the scene?
I don't have that information either.
This is the 15th this year officer-involved shooting in Indianapolis. Your reaction as deputy chief when you see this continuing to happen?
You know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating for the community, obviously, but it's also frustrating for our officers. There are some commonalities that we can objectively see. One is there are a lot of people with firearms. Two, there are a lot of people that have firearms that should not have firearms involved in these incidents. And lastly, there are several incidents where our officers are giving clear and concise verbal commands. And unfortunately, actions are occurring and our officers are forced to react to those actions.
And just so we're clear, you had mentioned that this individual put his weapon down, walked away from it toward the officers, then went back in the direction of the weapon.
He ran towards the direction of the weapon, yes, sir.
Just to go off the question before, is there something officers are noticing from suspects, people in the community, when they go to these incidents that turn into officer-involved shootings that's different than maybe years or months past, since we have seen so many recently?
You know, our officers are trained to respond to the actions that are presented in front of them. That is consistent. What we are starting to see is a lot of these are basically what I said before. Our officers are faced with armed individuals who are not following the directions of the officers, and our officers are responding to those actions.
So the man was allegedly firing shots from in the house, outside the house, but when police arrived, he was already outside, or was he called outside?
When officers originally arrived on scene, I believe he was outside and officers engaged.
Chief Taylor's mentioned in the past hiring an outside consultant to look into what has happened, the change that seems to have happened here with officer-involved shootings. Any update on that?
I don't have an update on that. I do think it's a responsible thing to do. We're going to always do what we should be doing in evaluating our training, our policies, and anything that we can do. Unfortunately, there are normally other people involved in these incidents, and we cannot always control what they do. And so our officers, again, are forced to respond to what they are presented with.
And IMPD has said before during budget meetings that about 80% of your calls are mental health related. What can be done? What more support does IMPD need to deal with those calls? Is this more counselors coming to the scene? What can be done to help?
I don't have an answer for that. What I can say is that you're correct. I don't know the exact number if it's 80%, but a lot of what our officers are faced are dealing with a lot of mental health runs. Our officers aren't necessarily always equipped to be able to handle these. And so any agency, entity that is willing to step up and help take some of this burden off of our officers would be appreciated.
What's your message to community members who have this mindset of this is happening far too often, why is this happening, and they have this fear of police? What is your message to those community members?
My message is this: our officers go out each and every day with a purpose to protect our community, and they do that every single day. And unfortunately, there are times where things happen and they are placed in situations where they have to respond to those actions. And as long as the community understands, when an officer gives you an order, a command to comply, follow the direction of the officer. The time right then and there is not the time to hold court. Follow the commands of the officers, and everyone can go home safely.
Will the suspect survive? Do you have an update on his condition?
Serious but stable.